Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the M and N Show's Sunday Late Night edition. Tonight's hosts are Manveer and Niru. The sponsors of today's podcast episode are Subway and Khalsa Secondary School. Get a free 6-inch sandwich when you sign up for one of their loyalty reward cards or their SPC card. Subway, think fresh, eat fresh.
This week's special will focus on women as well as their rights and their struggle for identity.
We will be looking back into our past, uncovering the very roots of the rise of feminist identity. We will be covering a very controversial and sensible topic that many individuals are concerned and have questions about.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Feminism, identity, all familiar words we have heard. Well, the identity of feminism has been hard at work to raise awareness about the challenges that women have faced.
When talking about women, identity plays a big role in the respect and dignity that a certain sex is given. Feminism, an idea, concept that can be said to be very confusing for some, which is why our Sunday night special edition guests are people who specialize in women's studies and have been avid members of the feminist community. They have a master's degree in women's studies and often take part in feminist rallies, including the Women's March that occurred 2 months ago in March. Their names are Miss Maddie Jaswal and Chanpreet Gurwal. Hello, Miss Jaswal and Miss Gurwal. How are you doing today?
Hello, Ms. Kaur. I am doing great.
Today's topic is women and their identity. As we know that females have been on the rise of making themselves seen as individuals are going through legal as well as some social challenges.
Feminism is an ever-changing concept, a fluid idea defined by society and culture, a biological fact that has created various implications for women all around the world. There is a constantly evolving effort to reconcile the dissimilarities of identity reflected through standards of beauty, sexuality, and gender roles.
Traditionally, the concept of identity has not focused on the individual's personal definitions of social categories such as gender, race, ethnicity, sex, and class identities, but rather identity has always been a strictly structured label that left little room for individuality. To better understand the concept of female identity through the past context of time, we will examine how primary social as well as legal challenges as well as external influences have impacted and are impacting the identity of my focus group today.
That's right. Women all around the world have faced many challenges. Often there are many perspectives around this topic. One perspective is that women are not a statistical minority, as in most societies. They are roughly equal in number to men, but they do qualify as a minority group because they tend to have less power and fewer privileges.
Underlying this unequal treatment of women is sexism, which is discrimination based on sex. In the context of society, discrimination against women in particular, discrimination against women is evident in a number of different spheres of society, whether political, legal, or economic. It must, however, be noted that the issue is rarely as simple as that of men versus women. Societies today are home to a variety of different classes, ethnicities, races, and nationalities, and some groups of women may enjoy a higher status and more power relative to select groups of men, depending on factors such as what racial and ethnic groups they are associated with.
Let's discuss some social and legal challenges that are a part of our roots for the development of women identity.
Sure, so an important woman that I myself was very fond of is Nellie McClung.
Nellie McClung. I have quite some knowledge about her.
Yes, McClung was a very individual who is known for her leadership role in the leading women's identity. Ms. McClung was a political activist. Her spirited leadership rallied others to cause of women's suffrage in Manitoba in the early 20th century. Nellie McClung's personal commitment to women's rights became her political cause as well.
Oh, Miss McClung sounds like a courageous woman.
She sure does indeed.
Continue.
Miss McClung began to speak out for female suffrage. Her concern for less fortunate women grew out of deep religious beliefs and devotion to her family. She had seen firsthand the suffering of women and children caused by neglect, overwork, poverty, and alcohol abuse. The real spirit of the suffrage movement, she once wrote, is sympathy and interest in the other woman and the desire to make the world a more home-like place to live in. Manitoba Women League Canada.
Sounds like Ms. McClung claimed these fears with reasonable discussion, personal charm, in irascible humor, and her fanciful hats.
She sure did.
To add another woman that has well been the right hand of McClung was Emily Murphy.
That's right.
Emily Murphy became the first female magistrate in the British Empire in 1916. Before that, she championed the rights of wives to share ownership in their husband's property, giving them and their children security in case of abandonment. Her efforts helped create the Married Women's Protective Act, passed in Alberta in 1911. Her tireless activism as judge and advocate of social welfare for women and children earned Emily widespread respect among the nation.
This led to many organizations and individuals calling for her appointment to the Senate. This was not possible, however, because the federal government deemed that women were not qualified persons as required for Senate appointments. But Emily was a tough, no-nonsense woman who never backed down from a fight. In fact, one of her trademark quotes was, "Whenever I don't know whether to fight or not, I fight." Naturally, she saw the Senate issue as an injustice against all women. So she enlisted the help of four equally brilliant and determined women to challenge this unfair bias.
Grewal, Emily Murphy, as well as Nellie McClung and three other women formed a political equality league.
The names of three other women were Louise McKenney, Henrietta Edwards, Irene Parlby. These five women were known as the Famous Five. They were petitioners in the groundbreaking Persons case, a case brought before the Supreme Court of Canada in 1927 and later decided by the Judicial Council of Britain's Council, Canada's highest court at the time. Led by Judge Emily Murphy, the group included Henrietta Edwards, Nellie McClung, Louise Crummy McKenney, and Irene Parlby.
Together, the five women had many years of active work in various campaigns for women's rights dating back to the 1880s and 90s, and they enjoyed a national and especially in the case of McClung, an international reputation among reformers.
Yes. At the time of their victory, the media dubbed the group as Alberta Five. Over time, as the case took on a privileged position in Canadian women's history, the group became popularly known as the Famous Five. They have come to represent an entire generation's political activism, including an earlier nationwide campaign for women's suffrage. Most recently, the case has attracted renewed controversy.
Absolutely correct, Ms. Kaur. Some see the Famous Five as a symbol of modern times, women's political rebellion and progress, and human rights more generally. Still others have criticized some members of the group as racist and elitist and see their accomplishments as tarnished by associations.
Reactions to the Famous Five have varied widely, but the significance of their contribution to the development of women's rights in Canada was underscored in 2000 with a dedication of a bronze statue called Women Are Persons. The Famous Five Foundation was established in 1996.
Nellie McClung had set the stage for feminism identity. However, let's talk in more modern terminology. Another woman doing her part to achieve feminine identity was former presidential candidate Mrs. Hillary Clinton.
Oh, really?
Yes, absolutely. While Hillary was going strong during the beginning of her campaign, she was later doomed for failure. When Mrs. Clinton was told to talk about the role of sexism, she replies, "It is real. It is very much a part of the landscape politically, socially, and economically." While women's rights have become an important and controversial issue in the United States as well as Canada, the level of sincere equality of women identity has not yet been achieved despite the many courageous women who have stepped up to change the standard of women's identity. And while Clinton may believe sexism played a role, as she told another interviewer, she believes that it was an overt sexism that in the end kept the presidency from the first female major party presidential candidate.
How do experts view this type of sexism out of the presidential field?
While many experts argue that sexism is more acceptable than racism, we are not as outraged by it or ashamed of it as much as we are about the other topics. It seems as people are not educated about this topic or few care to bring about awareness to stand up and do something about it. Of course, using sexism is also the laziest way to demean a woman. If you can't debate her ideas, just slam her appearance, her personality, her relationships, and her likability. Trump crosses the line all the time. Flustered during the debate because he couldn't out-debate Clinton on policy, he just leaned into the mic and dismissed her entirely. Nasty woman. That was the only phrase he would use to describe Clinton because he was flustered by the presidential debate.
I couldn't agree with you more. In many parts of the world, women are also facing sexism in terms of dress code. In various workplaces, women are being told how to dress, and many of these dress codes are developed by their male colleagues. They enforce sexy dress codes and often require women to dye their hair blonde, wear makeup, high heels, and skirts above the knees. How do you feel about the topic of sexist dress codes?
Well, Ms. Kohler, the internet has been abuzz nowadays with stories of the sexism women face at work. The dress code trend emerged after a report of MPs who led their first inquiry of its kind into what female employees are told to wear. They declared laws against bosses enforcing sexy dress codes already exist but need tightening up. Women are still too often required to wear makeup, high heels, skirts above the knee, revealing outfits, even to dye their hair blonde. The Women and Equalities Committee said the report prompted debate on Twitter, where one user summed up the thoughts of many by writing FFS, we live in a country and time when women can be sent home from work for not wearing heels. Others, like Breakfast TV presenter Piers Morgan, prompted a backlash by suggesting men face sexism too. Morgan wrote, male MPs have to conform to a strict dress code in House of Commons. Female MPs do not. I have not heard a single male MP cries sexist.
I couldn't agree with you more. Male MPs have complained of sexism against men, and Parliament's dress code, a fairly formal business where applies to both genders. So what started this all?
In one of its sessions, committee took evidence from 3 women who complained of sexism at work. They included Nicola Thorpe, whose petition against women being forced to wear high heels was backed by more than 150,000 people. Here's what they had to say at the time. Nicola Thorpe worked for an agency as a temporary receptionist at London. The report said when she refused an offer to go and buy heels, she was sent home without pay. She later started a hugely popular petition.
She says, they gave me a dress, which was fine, and then she pointed to my shoes, which were just plain, flat black ones, like the ones I am wearing today. The female supervisor said to me, you can't wear those, you have to wear high heels or we are going to send you home. A male colleague who stood right next to me was wearing similar flat black plain and smart shoes. She pointed out that he wasn't being sent home. She felt that the reason she was being sent home was because she was female.
How about politics? Does that come in legal or social challenges?
Well, in politics, as in the spheres addressed, we are in the period of simultaneous status and change. Women have been involved in political movements and campaigns for centuries, but it was only in 1918 that those over 30 won the right to vote and stand for election parliament.
Oh, that's astonishing.
It was only in 1928 when the suffrage was extended to all citizens over the age of 21, regardless of their sex, that Britain became a democracy. Sex remained, however, a key determinant of access to political power. It took 70 years from the point at which women could first stand for election and numerous general elections for the proportion of women in parliament to cross the 5% barrier.
Countries such as Nordic, which till recently topped the World League tables, it was the 1970s and 80s that were the transformative period. By the early 80s, the proportion of women in parliament had risen to 31% in Finland, 28% in Sweden, and 26% in Norway. In 1994, Sweden became the first country in the world to cross the 40% barrier. In the UK, by contrast, the significant shifts in the gender composition of parliament came a couple of decades later, and primarily through the adoption of various forms of affirmative action.
That's right, its core, the Liberal Democrats were the first to implement special measures to raise the proportion of women selected as candidates, introducing in the 1980s the compulsory shortlisting of women in all candidate selection processes. This initiative was later followed by the Labour Party, but neither initiative had